I was halfway through feeding the horses when I noticed a car parked sideways across my ranch gate. Arms crossed, phone already in hand. HOA Karen. She didn't even say hello. She told me my gate violated community rules and that I had 5 minutes to move it or she'd call the cops. I laughed. She absolutely didn't. She stepped back, dialed her phone, and waited like she'd already won. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Karen looked proud, almost excited, like this was the moment she'd been waiting for. The officer stepped out, glanced at the gate, then asked a simple question. "Who owns this land?" "I do," I said. That's when things got uncomfortable. The officer checked his tablet, nodded, and casually mentioned the ranch's federal land access grant, the same grant that helps fund road repairs, utilities, and, ironically, about half of the HOA's infrastructure. The same grant that gets renewed every year with one signature. Mine. Karen's face changed instantly. Confidence disappeared. Arms dropped, phone went silent. The officer cleared me on the spot. No violation, no warning, no issue. The gate stayed exactly where it was. Karen moved her car, and the HOA never bothered my ranch again. If you want the full story, more details, and what happened after this confrontation, the complete video is uploaded on my YouTube channel. Check it out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.
The day Cheryl from the HOA parked her shiny Lexus across my ranch gate, she probably thought it was just another little power trip. She stood there with one hand on her hip and the other holding her phone out like a weapon, already recording. Behind me, a loaded stock trailer rattled and bellowed with 30 head of cattle worth more than her luxury SUV. In front of me, blue and red lights crested the hill as the deputy she had called rolled toward us. She had no idea who she was really picking a fight with. That suited me. My name is Luke Ramirez, and I am not the kind of rancher the HOA is used to pushing around. My family has been running cattle on the same 300 acres outside Sandstone, Colorado, since my grandfather came back from the Korean War. I grew up fixing fences, calving out heifers in frozen mud, and learning that land remembers every promise, especially the ones written into deeds. By day, though, I work in a different kind of field. I am a regional compliance officer for the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. My job is reading fine print carefully. 2 years ago, after a drought and a hospital bill from my dad's heart surgery nearly sank us, I sold 80 rocky acres along the county road to a developer. In the contract, my lawyer made sure of 2 things. First, our water rights and grazing lease stayed untouched. Second, our ranch kept a recorded easement road cutting straight through what was now platted as Canyon Ridge Meadows, a shiny new subdivision with a fancier name than soil. I figured I would wave at a few new neighbors while hauling hay. I underestimated homeowners associations. They love rules over reason. For the first year, Canyon Ridge was quiet. The original developer, an older guy named Don Haskell, honored the easement, kept his construction crews off my fences, even asked me about native grasses. Then Don sold out to an investment group out of Phoenix, and they sent us Cheryl. She arrived in a spotless white blazer and wedge sandals unsuited for gravel, talking about protecting property values and modernizing community standards. Within a month, she had maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency. Within 2, she was emailing me about my roosters, my windmill, and my tractors. None had bothered anyone. Her first letter called my pre-dawn feeding schedule a nuisance. Her second complained that my working pens and loading chute were an eyesore visible from the model homes. I answered politely, attached copies of the recorded agricultural easement and right to farm statute the county had adopted years ago. The third letter dropped the polite mask. According to Cheryl, the easement road was a courtesy granted by the subdivision, subject to whatever reasonable rules the board decided. I reminded her easements are not courtesy, they are property rights. That did not fit her worldview. Control mattered more than contracts. The morning she finally blocked my gate started clear and cold. The kind of October day when breath hangs white over the pasture and the peaks already wear snow. I had been up since 3, hauling the first trailer of replacement heifers back from the Fort Morgan sale barn. Between the 3 loads I planned to make, I was bringing home nearly $50,000 of cattle, the foundation of next year's calf crop and my daughter Riley's college savings. I swung off the highway, turned onto the easement lane, and saw Cheryl's Lexus sideways across it, idling hot instead. I eased the truck to a stop, set the brake, and stepped out into the gravel. The cattle in the trailer shifted and stomped, nervous from the sudden halt. Cheryl stood beside her car in expensive running clothes and spotless white sneakers, like she had dressed for a catalog instead of a country road. Phone up, recording, of course. "This road is private now," she announced, voice already raised for the imagined audience online. "The easement lapsed when the development closed. You and your animals are trespassing. Move 1 inch and I am calling the sheriff. They will arrest you." I looked past her at my own gate, my own land visible just beyond her bumper. It is still funny how close rage can sit next to amusement. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my hands visible and my voice level, "this easement is recorded on every deed in your subdivision. Your board attorney has a copy. You are blocking lawful agricultural access." She rolled her eyes, perfectly rehearsed. "I talked to a lawyer on YouTube," she answered. "Easement expire. This is now a private community." She stabbed at her phone screen. "Fine, we will let law enforcement decide." I stayed leaning against my fender, hat low, hands still clear. "Mornin', Luke," Hanley said, "because out here deputies know the people who fix their broken fences in blizzards. What exactly seems to be the emergency on your neighbor's driveway, ma'am?" He was already suspicious. Cheryl sputtered, launching into a monologue about noise, smells, declining property values, and how my truck had scared her designer golden doodle. While she talked, I quietly took my worn leather wallet from my back pocket. When Hanley finally turned to me, I handed him 2 cards. One was my driver's license. The other bore a federal seal. Luke Ramirez, Senior Compliance Officer, Rural Infrastructure and Community Grants. Hanley's eyebrows climbed. Cheryl's rant stalled as she saw the emblem. "That little road you keep blocking," I said gently, "is not the only thing your HOA depends on me for now." Hanley studied the badge for a long second, then glanced at my trailer, at Cheryl, and finally at the blocked gate. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this road shows as a recorded agricultural easement in our system, and you're obstructing it. That's a safety issue, not to mention a civil one." Cheryl's confidence flickered, then she lifted her chin like a stage actress denied a cue. "He's threatening me," she insisted, waving her phone inches from Hanley's face. "He's waving federal stuff around to intimidate me." I hadn't said a word about intimidation, and Hanley knew it. "Luke," he asked, eyes on mine instead of on her camera, "do you have your paperwork for the easement handy?" I already had a folder in the truck, because folks like Cheryl exist, and my dad taught me that preparation beats outrage every time. I handed over the photocopies. Hanley scanned the legal description, the signatures, the dates older than either of us. Then he turned back to Cheryl with the kind of look I'd seen him give drunk drivers and barroom brawlers who suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere. "Ma'am," he said, "you're going to move that vehicle right now, and you're not going to block this road again. If you have a civil dispute, take it to a judge. But if I get called back out here for this, somebody's getting cited." For one bright second, I thought pride might keep her planted. Then self-preservation finally beat ego. She climbed into the Lexus, threw it into reverse harder than necessary, and jerked it aside, spraying gravel against my bumper. As I rolled past, she leaned out the window, still filming, and hissed that this wasn't over, that people like me always got what was coming them. I just tipped my hat and eased the rig through the gate, listening to the cattle settle as the familiar rattle of our own gravel drive replaced the clatter of confrontation. Anger rode shotgun all day, but by evening, numbers had pushed it into the back seat. 2 heifers were off their feed from the extra time standing. 1 calf was coughing from dust, and my vet bill would erase the slim profit I'd counted on.
I sat at the kitchen table that night under the yellow light, calculator on one side, Riley's untouched algebra homework on the other, and knew this could not happen again. If it were just an obnoxious neighbor, I'd build another road and be done. But easements aren't just convenience, they're leverage. The next morning, instead of climbing on a tractor, I drove into town and walked up the cracked concrete steps of the county recorder's office. Old wiring hummed in the ceilings, and the air smelled like dust and toner and quiet resentment. I pulled every document tied to my grandfather's sale, every plat of Canyon Ridge, every HOA filing that mentioned roads, drainage, or amenities. Hours later, wrists sore from turning pages, I had a neat stack of photocopies and a clearer picture than Cheryl ever bothered to get. The easement language was ironclad, in black ink older than anyone in her Facebook group. Better yet, the original development agreement between Don's company and the county referenced my easement specifically as a condition of plat approval. Buried 3 pages deeper was something Cheryl definitely hadn't read, a list of funding sources, including a rural infrastructure grant from my own department. $280,000 federal dollars had paid for Canyon Ridge's upgraded water lines, emergency access, and that decorative stone entryway Cheryl loved to pose beside. Every one of those dollars came wrapped in compliance conditions I knew by heart. I sat there in the stale office air, thumb on the grant number, thinking about Cheryl telling the deputy this was now a private road, and felt something settle inside me. Not vengeance exactly, more like the weight of knowing where the real boundaries lay. That night, over chicken enchiladas and the rattle of the dishwasher, I told Riley the short version. She was 16, old enough to read contracts and people. So they took federal money to build their fancy stone sign, she said, frowning, and now they're telling you it's none of the government's business what they do with the road. Something like that, I answered, though I knew it was more complicated and more dangerous than she realized. Dad, she said, pushing her glass away, you always tell me rules matter, all the boring stuff nobody reads at the bottom of the page. If they broke those rules, isn't it your job to fix it, even if it's messy? I looked at my daughter, at the girl who wanted to study environmental science and who spent weekends planting willows along our creek bed, and realized this wasn't just about cattle or gates anymore. It was about whether people like Cheryl could cash federal checks with one hand and slam gates on the other, pretending those things weren't connected. Before bed, I logged into the secure portal we used for grant monitoring, pulled up the Canyon Ridge file, and started reading the quarterly reports their board had been signing. The numbers didn't match what I'd seen with my own eyes on that cracked county road. The reports talked about maintaining emergency access 24/7, preserving agricultural corridors, and coordinating with adjacent landowners, all written in the bland language of bureaucracy. On paper, Canyon Ridge was a model of rural-suburban cooperation. On the ground, my gate told a different story, and Cheryl had just volunteered to be the villain in it. I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and knew that the next move had to be careful, documented, and absolutely by the book. People like Cheryl think rules are weapons you aim only one way. My job, on and off the ranch, was to remind them rules cut both directions. That night, the wind in the cottonwoods sounded calmer, and my sleep finally came easy again. Cheryl did not take the deputy's warning as a lesson. She took it as a challenge. Within a week, envelopes with the Canyon Ridge Meadows logo began showing up in my mailbox like junk mail with teeth. The first was an official notice of noise violations from early morning machinery. The second accused me of unsafe livestock practices visible from their walking trail. The third claimed my trucks were creating a traffic hazard every time I used the easement. She knew exactly what she was doing. Each letter was copied to the entire HOA board and to a private Facebook group she ran called Protect Our Property Values, where grainy photos of my corrals were posted beside captions about disease, odor, and criminal elements creeping in from the country. Never mind that my family had been there since the Eisenhower administration, and her subdivision was just old enough to have weeds in the cracks. I answered once, in writing, reminding the board of the right to farm ordinance and attaching the county attorney's memo from when the statute passed. After that, I stopped arguing and started documenting. I mounted a small camera pointed at the gate, upgraded the old trail cam on the fence line, and kept every envelope she sent in a cardboard box under my bed. Ranchers learn early that memories blur, but paper stays sharp. At work, I did something Cheryl would never have imagined. I walked into my supervisor's office and laid the whole situation on the table. Melissa Chen had run our regional office for a decade and measured crises in binders, not decibels. I told her about the easement, the blocked gate, the grant file I had reviewed, and the very personal stake I had in Canyon Ridge's compliance. Then I shut up and waited.
She listened without interrupting, then tapped a pen against her legal pad, the way she did when weighing 3 problems and 1 solution. "Luke," she said finally, "you were right to bring this straight here. You are walled off from any decision-making on this grant as of right now. But if their reports don't match reality, we have to look. That's not revenge, that's our mandate." She underlined a date and circled the grant number. 2 weeks later, a different white SUV rolled slowly past my gate, this one with government plates and 2 people in plain clothes studying a clipboard instead of a phone screen. Official site visit, unannounced, just like the handbook prescribes. While I moved hay bales in the barn, I watched them from a distance walk the subdivision perimeter, photograph the fire lane that dead-ended at a locked decorative gate, and stand a long time at my easement. They introduced themselves that afternoon at my kitchen table, where Melissa joined by speakerphone. "We're not here about your personal dispute, Mr. Ramirez," the lead auditor said, sliding his card across the wood. "We're here because the grant file says this community guaranteed agricultural access and dual emergency routes in exchange for federal funds. Either that's true or it isn't. Your job now is to stay out of our way and keep records." Cheryl, of course, saw the SUVs and clipboards and spun a different story. Within days, she had fired off a 12-page complaint to the state representative, the county commissioners, and Melissa's boss in Denver, accusing me of sicking federal agents on an innocent neighborhood. In her version, I was a rogue bureaucrat using government muscle to punish her for reasonable community standards. She attached screenshots, clipped videos, and 3 resident statements carefully stripped of context. The irony, which would have been funny if it hadn't involved my career, was that her complaint forced the department's ethics office to widen the lens. Now they weren't just evaluating one rural infrastructure grant, they were evaluating me. I spent an entire day in a conference room in Denver under fluorescent lights, walking 2 ethics attorneys through every text, email, and interaction I had ever had with Cheryl and her board. They were thorough. I told them about the deputy at the gate, about Riley's question at the dinner table, about the moment I saw that grant number in the county records and realized there was a conflict I couldn't ignore. I also told them exactly what I had not done. I hadn't called the auditors. Melissa had. I hadn't threatened Cheryl with federal anything. Every warning I had given was about state law and recorded easements. Then I waited. When the verdict came, it was printed in language as dry as old fence posts. No evidence of improper influence by employee. No misuse of position for personal gain. Recommendation: continue monitoring grant independently. Restrict employee from direct involvement with specific file. In plain English, I kept my job, my badge, and my clearance. Cheryl, on the other hand, had just guaranteed that every line of Canyon Ridge's funding would be read with a magnifying glass.
Out in the subdivision, the first cracks in her story showed up as questions at HOA meetings. Why were federal auditors asking about fire access if everything was in order? Why did the grant paperwork mention a secondary emergency route where there was now only a landscaped median and a keypad gate? Why, one retired engineer wanted to know, did the budget show culvert upgrades that no one could physically locate under any street? Here's something most homeowners never think about until it's too late. When an HOA takes federal money for infrastructure, it stops being just a private club with dues and newsletters. It becomes a steward of public funds with obligations that outlast any one board president's ego. You can vote on paint colors and pool hours. You cannot vote away conditions written into a grant agreement signed on behalf of the United States. By the time autumn storms rolled off the mountains, questions had hardened into fear.
Residents stopped waving from driveways. They started reading their mail, bylaws, and the fine print. Cheryl's breaking point came one night in November when a hard rain hit the Front Range. The detention basin the plans had promised was just a shallow, grassy depression behind the clubhouse, more ornamental than engineered. By midnight, that depression overflowed, sending a brown sheet of water across the cul-de-sacs and over the only open exit. My phone buzzed with photos from a volunteer fireman who lived 3 miles down the road. SUVs pushing through knee-deep water, kids carried piggyback, a propane grill bobbing like driftwood. The next morning, the same white SUVs with government plates were back, only now they were accompanied by a county flood engineer and a camera crew from the local news. Flashing lights striped Cheryl's beloved stone entryway as residents stepped through mud to reach folding chairs hastily set up in the clubhouse. I watched from the back, hat in my hands, purely as a neighbor. On the pulled-down projector screen, the auditor clicked through slides. "Here is what Canyon Ridge promised the federal government," he said, pointing to neat diagrams of oversized culverts, a real detention pond, and a gravel fire road looping around the subdivision and tying directly into my easement. "And here is what was actually built." New photos showed undersized pipes already half silted in, the ornamental swale behind the clubhouse, and that fire gate welded shut for aesthetics. A murmur spread through the room as people recognized what they were seeing. Cheryl tried to stand, to steer the narrative the way she always had, but this time her voice shook. "Those plans were just conceptual," she insisted. "The board never agreed to every detail." The auditor let her finish, then pulled up the executed grant agreement with her electronic signature at the bottom. "The conditions are not conceptual," he said evenly. "You certified yearly that these specific improvements were installed and maintained. That certification unlocked federal funds." That was the moment the room understood what I already knew. I did not just drive a truck past their mailboxes. I helped manage the pipeline that filled their pipes and lights and entryway with taxpayer money. When someone abuses that, my office has tools sharper than a nasty letter. Suspension of funding, demand for repayment, referral to the Inspector General. The power to say, in effect, the federal spigot is closed until you fix this, and every homeowner here will feel the cost. The letter freezing new disbursements went out the following week. Insurance carriers balked. Contractors demanded payment. Suddenly, Cheryl was not the defender of property values, but the woman whose signature had put everyone at risk of a 6-figure clawback. At the next HOA election, she finished a distant 4th in a field of 4. The new board invited the auditors back, hired a real engineer, and voted to cut the welds on the fire gate and pour the detention basin they should have had from day one. They also voted unanimously to record a fresh notice of my easement.